When one weapon system becomes so dominant, so completely lethal, that it fundamentally shifts the balance of power on the battlefield. That moment came in the Pacific during World War II, and it involved a gun that most people have never even heard of. The Mark 37 fire control system. Now, I know what you're thinking. A fire control system doesn't sound sexy. It doesn't sound like something that would absolutely obliterate Japanese convoy operations across the entire Pacific theater. But this wasn't just any fire control system. This was American engineering at its absolute peak, paired with the devastating firepower of 5-inch 50-caliber cannons mounted on our destroyers and cruisers. And when I say devastated, I mean we're talking about precision strikes that would reduce entire Japanese supply convoys to burning wreckage in minutes. Picture this. It's 1944, somewhere in the Philippine Sea. Japanese command sends out a convoy of transports, cargo ships, escorted by a handful of destroyers. They think they're safe. They've calculated the risk, analyzed the patrol routes, made their intelligence estimates. And then our task force appears on the horizon. What happens next is absolutely brutal. Within moments of engagement, the Mark 37 system locks onto targets with such accuracy that our gunners achieve hit rates that would make modern naval warfare look primitive by comparison. We're not talking about wild shots or lucky hits. We're talking about calculated precision strikes that demolish these ships one after another. Japanese sailors watch in horror as their vessels erupt in flames, torn apart by shells that seem to come from nowhere and hit with surgical accuracy. The Mark 37 wasn't just a weapon system, it was a revolutionary piece of technology that gave American naval forces an enormous advantage in surface combat operations. It was automated. It was intelligent. It predicted target movement using electromechanical computers that were, frankly, decades ahead of anything the Japanese had in their arsenal. The system could track fast-moving targets, compensate for wind, account for the motion of our own ships, and deliver devastating firepower with a consistency that was absolutely unmatched. Japanese commanders soon learned to dread the sight of American task forces because they knew what was coming. They knew their convoys were going to be decimated. They knew their ships were going to burn. This is a story about American naval superiority in the Pacific. This is a story about how superior technology, combined with superior training and superior tactics, can absolutely dominate an enemy. This is the story of the Mark 37 and the Japanese convoys that never had a chance against American firepower. Stay with me, because this is going to get absolutely insane. Before we dive into the actual mechanics of how the Mark 37 system operated and the specific engagements where it absolutely tore through Japanese convoys, I've got to ask you something. Where are you watching this video from right now? Are you somewhere on the East Coast? Maybe you're down south, or maybe you're way out west watching this and thinking about American naval dominance. Drop your location down in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where all you history enthusiasts are tuning in from. And while you're down there in the comments, hit that like button if this story about American naval firepower is hitting you. Show YouTube that you want more military history content like this, more stories about American technological superiority, more tales about how we dominated our enemies in the Pacific. And hey, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, what are you waiting for? We've got incredible stories dropping all the time about American military power, about epic battles, about weapons systems that absolutely changed the course of history. Subscribe now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let's get back to this story, because what happened to those Japanese convoys was absolutely devastating. The Mark 37 fire control system was born from necessity. During the early years of the Pacific War, American naval forces quickly realized that our existing fire control systems were adequate, but they weren't cutting edge. They weren't giving us the overwhelming advantage we needed to dominate Japanese naval operations. So, American engineers and naval designers went back to the drawing board. They wanted to create something revolutionary, something that would put our gunners ahead of the competition by an enormous margin. What they created was the Mark 37, and it fundamentally changed naval warfare forever. The system itself was a marvel of electromechanical engineering. Weighing approximately 4,000 pounds and measuring about 7 feet in length, the Mark 37 was a compact powerhouse of American innovation. It used electrical servos and mechanical computers to calculate firing solutions with a precision that was absolutely mind-blowing for the early 1940s. The system could intake data from radar installations, manually from spotters and from optical systems, then process all of that information simultaneously to determine the exact firing angle and elevation needed for a direct hit. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Mark 37 incorporated a feature that the Japanese Navy simply didn't have anything comparable to. It had the ability to track moving targets and predict their future position. This wasn't guesswork. This was calculated prediction based on observed speed and course. If a Japanese destroyer was sailing at 25 knots and making a sharp turn, the Mark 37's mechanical computers would immediately recalculate the intercept point and automatically adjust the gun elevations and bearings. By the time our 5-inch 50 caliber rounds were heading down range, the targeting solution was already accounting for exactly where that target was going to be when the shell arrived. The 5-inch 50 caliber cannons paired with the Mark 37 were devastating weapons in their own right. Each round weighed approximately 54 pounds and carried a high explosive warhead packed with enough destructive force to tear through a ship's superstructure like paper. These guns could fire at approximately 15 to 20 rounds per minute, which meant sustained volleys of accurate fire could absolutely pound a target into submission. When mounted on American cruisers and destroyers, typically in twin mounts with dual 5-inch guns working in coordination, the firepower was absolutely overwhelming. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea and the subsequent engagements in the Philippine waters, the Mark 37 demonstrated its absolute dominance. American task forces, equipped with these fire control systems and crewed by well-trained gunners, would engage Japanese convoys in what rapidly became one-sided slaughters. The Mark 37 would lock onto a target. The system would calculate the firing solution, and within minutes, a Japanese transport ship would be a burning wreck sliding into the ocean. Then, the system would pivot to the next target in the convoy and repeat the process. The psychological impact on Japanese commanders cannot be overstated. They knew that when American naval forces appeared, their convoy operations were essentially over. They would lose ships. They would lose supplies. They would lose personnel. There was no effective counter to the Mark 37's accuracy and speed. Japanese destroyers lacked equivalent fire control systems. Their older gunnery systems relied on manual spotting and calculation, which meant their salvos were far less accurate and far less deadly. By the time a Japanese gunner was correcting fire and preparing a second volley, American gunners had already placed half a dozen accurate rounds on target. The Mark 37 represented American industrial and technological superiority at the highest level. It represented the culmination of decades of naval engineering experience combined with cutting-edge innovations in electromechanical computing. It was the physical manifestation of American naval dominance, and it delivered devastating results against Japanese convoy operations throughout the latter half of the Pacific War. Let me walk you through what actually happened during one of the most devastating convoy engagements of 1944. I'm talking about when American naval forces encountered a Japanese supply convoy heading toward the Philippines. This wasn't just any convoy. This was a major resupply operation. Dozens of transport ships and cargo vessels escorted by Japanese destroyers and cruisers. The Japanese commander felt confident. He had destroyers. He had fighter cover from nearby airfields. He had made calculations that suggested his convoy would make it through. He was wrong. Our task force appeared on the horizon at dawn. Long-range radar on our cruisers immediately detected the convoy at roughly 18,000 yards, which is almost 10 miles away. This is crucial because this distance is where the Mark 37 system absolutely dominated the engagement. Japanese optical systems couldn't reliably acquire targets at this range. Their older fire control systems weren't designed for these distances, but our Mark 37 systems locked onto targets with radar guidance and began calculating firing solutions while the Japanese were still trying to figure out if we were really there. The engagement opened with a wall of accurate fire. American 5-inch 50 caliber rounds, precisely calculated and perfectly timed, began raining down on the Japanese convoy. The first volley hit 3 transport ships almost simultaneously. One ship, a cargo vessel of approximately 8,000 tons, took 2 direct hits from our shells. Each 5-inch shell, traveling at speeds exceeding 2,000 feet per second, punched through the vessel's hull and exploded inside the cargo hold. Within minutes, the ship was engulfed in flames and sinking into the Philippine waters. Its crew, approximately 130 men, abandoned the burning wreckage and desperately swam for their lives. Japanese destroyers attempted to respond. They turned toward our task force, trying to close the distance and bring their own guns to bear. But here's where the Mark 37 system showed its absolute superiority. As the Japanese destroyers maneuvered to attack, the Mark 37 automatically recalculated firing solutions for every change in course and speed. American gunners working with this incredible system were able to track these fast-moving targets with a precision that Japanese gunners absolutely could not match. When our shells landed, they landed where we intended them to land. They landed on target. A Japanese destroyer, a Kagero-class vessel, made a desperate run toward our cruiser formation. The destroyer was fast, approximately 35 knots, and her crew was determined to close the distance and launch a torpedo attack. But the Mark 37 systems locked onto this maneuvering target and calculated its trajectory. American cruiser gunners fired coordinated volleys. 10 5-inch shells arrived at the Japanese destroyer's position in a devastating salvo. 4 direct hits. The destroyer shuddered under the impact of these massive explosions. Her superstructure was torn apart. Her engine rooms filled with water. She was sinking within 5 minutes. This pattern repeated throughout the engagement. Japanese convoy vessels, without adequate escorts and without effective defenses against American naval gunfire, were systematically destroyed. Transport ship after transport ship was hit, set on fire, and sent to the bottom. The cargo they carried, desperately needed supplies for Japanese forces in the Philippines, was scattered across the ocean floor. Japanese personnel in lifeboats watched as their entire convoy was annihilated. The Mark 37 fire control system made this devastation possible. Superior technology, paired with superior training and superior tactics, resulted in an absolutely one-sided naval engagement. The Japanese convoy that sailed confidently toward the Philippines never reached its destination. Instead, it became another chapter in the story of American naval supremacy in the Pacific theater. What really separated the Mark 37 system from everything else on the battlefield was its radar integration. And I'm talking about radar technology that was absolutely revolutionary for the 1940s. The Mark 8 and Mark 12 radar systems, mounted on American cruisers and destroyers, could detect enemy vessels at ranges exceeding 20,000 yards, and they could track those vessels continuously throughout an engagement. The Mark 37 system could receive data directly from these radar installations and incorporate that information into its firing calculations in real time. For the Japanese Navy, this was absolutely devastating. Their ships didn't have radar systems that could compete with ours. Some Japanese naval vessels had radar installations. Sure, but they were inferior, they were unreliable, and they didn't integrate with their fire control systems the way American technology did. When Japanese gunners attempted to engage American task forces at night or in poor visibility conditions, they were essentially shooting blind. They were making educated guesses based on incomplete information. Meanwhile, American gunners, guided by the Mark 37 system and fed targeting data from radar installations, were hitting targets with devastating accuracy in conditions where Japanese guns simply couldn't effectively operate. The psychological impact of this technological advantage cannot be overstated. Japanese convoy commanders knew that when American naval forces appeared, equipped with this fire control technology, their ships were going to be hit. There was no running, no hiding, no tactical solution that would prevent the destruction of their convoy. American ships could engage at ranges where Japanese ships couldn't effectively fight back. American shells would arrive on target with consistency that seemed almost supernatural to Japanese sailors who were experiencing this technology for the first time. Entire crews of transport ships watched as their vessels were systematically destroyed by accurate fire that came from impossibly distant sources. Consider the specifications of what was happening here. A 5-inch 50 caliber shell weighing approximately 54 pounds and packing approximately 1 pound of explosives in its warhead could penetrate several inches of steel armor plating. When multiple shells, precisely calculated and perfectly coordinated, struck a cargo ship in rapid succession, they caused catastrophic damage. Cargo hold fires would spread rapidly, hull breaches would fill compartments with seawater, structural integrity would fail. Ships that took 3 or 4 direct hits from 5-inch shells were essentially finished. They were going down. The only question was how quickly the ocean would claim them. The Mark 37 system ensured that these hits were consistent and overwhelming. American fire control officers, working with sophisticated electromechanical computers, could process multiple targets simultaneously. While one 5-inch gun mount was engaging a destroyer, another gun mount could be tracking and engaging a transport ship. The system allowed for division of targets, coordination of fire, and overwhelming concentration of force against high-priority targets. Japanese convoy escorts simply couldn't respond to this level of coordinated firepower. There's another aspect that's absolutely fascinating from a historical perspective. The Mark 37 system represented American faith in technology as a solution to tactical problems. American naval engineers believed that superior technology, combined with superior industrial capacity, could overcome numerical disadvantages or tactical challenges. And they were right. The Mark 37 proved that belief time and time again throughout the Pacific War. It took the superior training of American sailors and combined it with superior equipment to create a naval system that was simply unstoppable. By 1944 and 1945, the Japanese Navy was essentially finished as an effective fighting force in surface combat operations. They lacked the technology, lacked the training, lacked the resources to effectively counter American naval superiority. The Mark 37 fire control system was a huge part of that story. It was the technological embodiment of American naval dominance. Let's talk about the specific ships that mounted the Mark 37 system and what they were capable of delivering to the battlefield. The American Cleveland-class light cruisers, absolutely packed with firepower, typically mounted a total of 12 5-inch 50 caliber guns, arranged in 6 twin mounts. Each twin mount had its own Mark 37 fire control system, which meant a single Cleveland-class cruiser was essentially 6 independent weapon systems operating in perfect coordination. When a Cleveland-class cruiser opened fire on a Japanese convoy, it was like a precision machine of death and destruction, absolutely unleashing itself on enemy targets. The Fargo-class light cruisers, which came later in the war, represented the absolute peak of American light cruiser design. These ships, approximately 610 feet in length and displacing approximately 6,000 tons of water, were floating fortresses of American firepower. They carried 12 5-inch 50-caliber guns with Mark 37 fire control systems. During the later stages of the Pacific War, these ships participated in countless convoy interception operations and absolutely dominated every engagement they participated in. American heavy cruisers, the New Orleans class and the Baltimore class, were even more devastating. These ships, displacing approximately 10,000 tons and measuring roughly 600 feet in length, mounted 8-inch guns alongside 5-inch secondary armament. The 5-inch guns on these heavy cruisers were also equipped with Mark 37 fire control systems, which meant that even the secondary armament was deadly accurate. Japanese convoy operations became absolutely impossible whenever American heavy cruisers were operating in the area. And then there were the American destroyers. Ships like the Fletcher class and the Gearing class destroyers, approximately 2,000 tons and measuring approximately 370 feet in length, carried 5-inch 50-caliber guns equipped with Mark 37 fire control systems. These destroyers, fast and maneuverable, could be positioned ahead of task forces to screen for enemy vessels and provide additional firepower during convoy engagements. A single Fletcher-class destroyer could absolutely shred an unescorted Japanese merchant ship with accurate 5-inch fire. The firepower that could be concentrated on a Japanese convoy when an American task force showed up was absolutely overwhelming. Picture this scenario. A task force consisting of 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 6 destroyers, all equipped with Mark 37 fire control systems, encounters a Japanese convoy of 20 transport ships. What happens next is absolutely predictable. Within the first few minutes of engagement, multiple Japanese transport vessels are hit and begin sinking. Japanese escorts attempt to respond, but are immediately targeted by American heavy cruiser fire. Within 10 to 15 minutes, the engagement is essentially over. Half the Japanese convoy has been sunk or set on fire. The remaining ships are desperately attempting to scatter and escape. The issue for Japanese commanders was that they couldn't effectively defend their convoys against this level of American naval firepower. They couldn't add enough escorts to make a difference because they simply didn't have enough destroyers and cruisers available. They couldn't effectively fight back because their fire control systems weren't accurate enough. They couldn't outrun American task forces because our ships were faster and our radar allowed us to track them across enormous distances. The only viable strategy for Japanese convoy commanders became minimizing losses by breaking convoys into smaller groups and routing them through areas where American naval forces weren't expected to appear. But American naval intelligence was effective. American reconnaissance aircraft operated throughout the Pacific. American submarines reported on Japanese fleet movements. When Japanese convoys were routed through supposedly safe waters, they frequently encountered American task forces waiting for them. The Mark 37 fire control system ensured that when these encounters happened, they ended with American victories and Japanese losses. The Japanese Navy, facing technological disadvantages and unable to effectively counter American naval superiority, gradually saw its convoy operations become impossible to sustain. This was naval warfare in the age of American technological dominance. I want to give you some specific historical examples of what the Mark 37 system accomplished during actual convoy operations in the Pacific. During the Battle of the Surigao Strait in October of 1944, Japanese naval forces attempted to push through American defensive positions to attack our invasion fleet at Leyte. American destroyers, equipped with Mark 37 fire control systems and 5-inch 50-caliber guns, launched coordinated torpedo attacks and gunfire attacks against Japanese capital ships. The Mark 37 systems allowed American destroyer crews to maintain accurate fire even at night and in challenging visibility conditions. Later, during the Okinawa campaign in 1945, Japanese convoy operations were absolutely decimated by American naval forces. When Japanese attempted to resupply their forces in the Philippines or maintain their shrinking supply lines, they were consistently intercepted by American task forces. Every time American naval forces equipped with Mark 37 systems engaged Japanese convoys, the results were the same. The convoys were destroyed. Japanese survivors described the experience as absolutely devastating. Ships that had sailed confidently toward their destinations would suddenly be engulfed in accurate fire and sink into the Pacific Ocean. Consider what this meant strategically. The Japanese military was fighting a defensive war across an enormous geographic area. They had forces scattered throughout the Philippines, throughout Southeast Asia, throughout the Pacific Islands. These forces needed constant resupply. Food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies all had to be transported by convoy from Japanese-held territories to forward operating areas. But American naval superiority, enabled by the Mark 37 fire control system, made effective resupply operations virtually impossible. Japanese forces in forward areas were increasingly cut off from supplies. This logistical choking off of Japanese forces contributed significantly to their eventual collapse in 1945. The training that American sailors received on the Mark 37 system was absolutely exceptional. American naval gunnery schools taught crews how to effectively use the system, how to interpret the targeting data it provided, how to make real-time adjustments based on observed shell splash. Crews practiced extensively with these systems. They became intimately familiar with every aspect of how the Mark 37 operated. By the later stages of the Pacific War, American destroyer crews were executing gunnery procedures with a proficiency that was absolutely remarkable. They could place accurate fire on target in a matter of minutes. Japanese gunnery training, by contrast, was becoming increasingly inadequate as the war progressed. Experienced Japanese naval gunners were being killed in action faster than they could be replaced. Training programs were disrupted by American attacks on Japanese naval bases. The replacement personnel entering the Japanese Navy often had minimal training compared to veteran crews. When these inexperienced Japanese gun crews attempted to engage American naval forces equipped with Mark 37 systems, they were outmatched in every conceivable way. Experience was facing technology, and technology was absolutely winning. The impact of Mark 37-equipped American naval forces on Japanese convoy operations cannot be overstated. By 1945, Japanese logistical operations were in complete chaos. Supply convoys were being hunted to destruction. Japanese commanders were desperately trying to find ways to transport essential supplies without being decimated by American naval firepower. Some Japanese convoys would break into extremely small, dispersed groups, hoping that scattered small vessels would be harder to intercept than organized convoy formations. But American naval forces, operating with superior radar and superior fire control systems, still managed to find and destroy these scattered groups. The Mark 37 fire control system was absolutely integral to American naval dominance in the Pacific theater. It was the technological edge that transformed American naval superiority from a general advantage into an absolutely overwhelming dominance. Japanese naval forces simply could not effectively counter this technology. The result was inevitable. American naval forces, equipped with Mark 37 systems and crewed by well-trained American sailors, dominated every surface engagement they participated in. Japanese convoys were systematically destroyed, and the Japanese military was gradually starved of the supplies it needed to sustain its war effort. This is the story of American technological superiority, and how that superiority translated into absolutely devastating military victories against Japanese forces in the Pacific theater. The Mark 37 fire control system represented the culmination of American naval engineering, American innovation, and American commitment to maintaining technological dominance over our enemies. When paired with well-trained crews and superior American ships, the Mark 37 system proved to be absolutely unstoppable. Japanese convoys that sailed into encounters with American naval forces equipped with this technology were systematically destroyed. Japanese commanders learned to dread the presence of American task forces because they knew what was coming. They knew their convoys were going to be decimated. They knew their ships were going to burn. The Mark 37 wasn't just a weapon system. It was a symbol of American military superiority. It represented everything that made American forces so devastatingly effective in the Pacific War. Superior technology, superior training, superior tactics, and superior resources all combined to create a military force that was absolutely unstoppable. Japanese naval forces couldn't effectively counter the Mark 37 system. They lacked the technology. They lacked the resources. They lacked the training to effectively respond to American naval dominance. As a result, they lost convoy after convoy, they lost supply line after supply line, and they lost the ability to sustain their military operations across the Pacific. This is the legacy of American naval power. This is the story of how American innovation absolutely dominated our enemies. If you found this story as absolutely insane as I do, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible military history content.